Hello there, Jeremy Cook here with On the Money Home Inspections. I get a lot of questions about poly B pipe, and I just wanted to make a little video here to tell you about how you can determine if it's poly B and what are some of the main issues that your home inspector should be looking for in a home that might contain polybutylene pipe or poly B. Here are some of the main locations that you can find poly B pipe in a home. In utility rooms, at hot water tanks, at the main service entrance coming into the building on both sides of the main shutoff, above drop ceilings in basements, in behind toilets near the floor, and under sinks in bathrooms or kitchens. So when I find poly B in a home, there are a few different things I want to check to make sure that you're not going to have problems with it down the road. One of the main things are plastic fittings. We don't want to see any plastic fittings that are visible. If we see even one, that means there could be more of them hidden behind the wall, and that could be an issue down the road. The plastic fittings get a crimp ring on them to hold the pipe, to hold it all together, and what happens is when that gets crimped, sometimes it can crack, and then down the road, those will release and you'll have a huge leak. Another thing with the plastic fittings is they're a little more susceptible to temperature change. So if they're on the hot water line, you got hot water running through the line, that water cools down, hot, cold, expansion and contraction, makes those plastic fittings move around inside the pipe, they become loose, and they'll let go. Now that could be years down the road, so there's really no way to tell how long those plastic fittings will last. If I see plastic fittings, pretty much just call them out as needing to be replaced and further evaluation of the concealed plumbing. So what we want to see are brass fittings like this one. This is brass, it's very hard. When you put a crimp ring on there, you crimp the pipe together, this isn't going to crack, this isn't going to let go. It doesn't move around a lot with different temperatures, and it's a lot better fitting down the road. This is what we want to see. Around the hot water tank, there are a couple more things, even preventative measures that we want to take down the road. So how hot is the hot water in the hot water tank? Is it turned up to maximum? If we have the hot water tank cranked right up to very hot, that means there's going to be a larger difference in the temperature change throughout the pipes in the home. When it goes from hot to cold, those are going to be extremes now. Those extremes mean the fittings will move a little bit more, the pipes will flex a bit more, better chance for leaks. So we want to turn the temperature on that hot water tank down to a medium level. This is the adjustment for the hot water tank temperature. If you keep the temperature on the hot water tank turned down, you're going to be better off down the road. At the top of the tank, we also want to see no plastic within about 12 to 18 inches of the hot water outlet on the hot water tank. So when that hot water is coming out of the tank, that's where it's at its hottest point. And the plastic pipe can deform, it can melt, it can just come loose over time. So we want to see a little bit of copper there, and then continuing on with the poly B or even the PEX pipe, which is the modern version. Whenever we see a connection to poly B, whether it be from poly B to PEX or copper or whatever, we want to make sure we have the right type of fitting on that poly B for the transition. Can't just use any fitting. You want to have a fitting just like this one. On the poly B side, it's slightly larger in diameter. You won't be able to see this on the video, but it is a little bit larger. There are multiple rings here, and on the PEX side, there are very few rings and it's a little bit smaller. And for the different types of pipe, it's been determined that that's what's going to hold best. So when you get the two pieces of pipe on there, they're going to hold together properly. The way you can identify this fitting, even though it's going to be inside the pipe and you can't see it, the way you can identify it is by the rings. So when you have a transition fitting, you'll typically have one brass colored ring and one black ring. And if I see the two different colored rings on that fitting, then I know, or I have a lot better idea, that that's probably a professional installation with the proper fitting. Here's the black ring and here's the copper colored ring. This is a typical installation for a transition fitting. If I see two of the same colored rings, sure, there's a chance that the plumber just happened to have two same colored rings, just went ahead and installed it. He knows what he's doing. But I don't really want to take that chance on your behalf. I'm going to pretty much tell you that you're going to want to take a look at replacing at least that fitting. We can take a look at some of the other Poly B fittings in the home. We can try and determine if they maybe were put in at the same time and make a decision there. Another thing we want to look at with the fittings is we want to make sure that the crimp rings are on straight. Now that's going to apply to Poly B pipe, it's going to apply to PEX pipe, any kind of pipe that has a fitting and a crimp ring on it. So when the plumber installs the pipe, this is PEX pipe, this isn't Poly B, but it's the same procedure. So you're going to put the ring on the pipe, they're going to put it on the fitting, and then what they want to do is crimp it to make it watertight. So they just seal it like that, give it a squeeze, and there you go. There's a proper PEX fitting right there. And that would apply to Poly B as well. We can see that the ring is nice and straight. If we get a ring that's crimped on an angle, it'll be all lopsided. It's very difficult to crimp a ring crooked. So if you see one that's crooked, you know that that plumber wasn't necessarily being all that careful installing the pipe, and we want to take a look at the whole job. A couple of other things that can affect Poly B are high levels of chlorine and high levels of ultraviolet light before the pipe was even installed. So when the pipe arrived at the home, when they were building it, it was laying outside maybe, getting a lot of sun. That's bad for Poly B pipe, and it's even bad for some types of PEX pipe. Now, high chlorine levels and high UV levels before installation are going to be basically impossible to determine during a home inspection. But if we see evidence of minor repairs, lots of couplings in the pipe in the utility room, those might be indications that there have been some prior leaks and that they've tried to patch them instead of just replacing the pipe. Maybe they just didn't know better. Maybe they didn't know about Poly B. So if we see lots of couplings along the way, that's going to be an indication that either there was some high chlorine levels in the home, or more likely that the pipe was exposed to UV and is a little bit brittle and probably will fail down the road. One of the main things that makes Poly B fail is pressure. So we've talked about the fittings, we've talked about the crimp rings, we've talked about turning down your hot water tank, but what about the pipe itself? What about this part of the pipe right here throughout the home? How susceptible is that? The biggest thing that's going to affect this part of the pipe behind the walls or wherever it might be is pressure inside the pipe trying to push out. A typical home is going to have somewhere between 40 and 80 psi of water pressure, depending on the area. And what I like to do when I get to the home is outside on the hose bib, I'll hook up a gauge and just check the pressure. If the pressure is in that range, then we're all set to go. If the pressure is right around 80 to 85 psi and we have a PEX pipe installation, which is a newer installation, then we're still okay. If we have Poly B pipe in the home and the pressure is up around the 85 psi, we're going to want to make sure we install a pressure reducing valve, which is just simply a valve that gets installed right at the beginning of the plumbing line coming into the home, and it just regulates the pressure to the rest of the house. It's a manually adjusted valve. You have a professional plumber install it for you. Relatively inexpensive, few $100s, and it's going to save you a lot of headaches down the road. If I see Poly B, I like to look for the valve anyway, and then in conjunction with the high water pressure, we definitely want to see pressure reducing valve installed in a Poly B system. As well, even if the pressure is, say, 70 psi and you still have a little bit of room there before you reach the maximum, there are definitely fluctuations that come from the city's water, and that pressure might jump up at some point. The pressure reducing valve will make sure that that pressure gets knocked down before it gets into the home. That's going to save you a lot of leaks down the road with that concealed plumbing. So you've hired the right home inspector and they've helped you identify Poly B in the home. They've helped educate you about possible concerns, and maybe you've even brought in a plumber to double check and correct any issues that were noted during the home inspection. There are a couple other things to consider that are really beyond the scope of a home inspection, but I want to bring them up for you anyway. The first one is call your insurance agent. Make sure that you're going to be able to get insurance on the home at the rate that you're expecting. Some insurance companies won't insure Poly B. The second thing to consider is that if your insurance company will insure Poly B, which is typical, that if there ever was a leak down the road, whether it be with Poly B, copper, PEX, any other material, that the insurance company will likely only pay to replace the section of plumbing that was damaged that caused the leak. So if there's a leak down the road, they're not going to pay to replace the entire Poly B system. They're going to take the assumption that the entire Poly B system is okay, except for that one tiny section of pipe. As long as you know that, you're all set to go. Give us a call, 403-909-7600.